Hello, this is Nadia from She Builds Again, and I am here for another episode. And I'm going to be sharing in this episode things nobody tells you about moving to Bali with kids. I'm going to be sharing my thoughts about some of the lessons, some of the challenges that we've had along the way, and how we've actually worked to overcome them. Because what I realize is that moving when you're single or when you're on your own or even as a couple is so much different than when you're moving with kids, because it's not just about you. You really do have to prioritize their safety, their well-being, how they settle into their new environment, and it just comes with so many more mental things that you're trying to tally. And it's for sure been something that's been worthwhile for our family. It's been something that has taught us and grown us in ways that we definitely wouldn't have been challenged and wouldn't have been stretched if we were still back home in our small island in Bermuda. But I also wanted to go into some of the ways that it has also maybe been a little hard to navigate and how we've overcome some of those things. Because I really do believe that even though it's not all rainbows and sunshine, there are definitely ways that you can still support your kids through any kind of transition. No matter where you decide to move, there are going to be pros and cons, and really just focusing on some of the pros while trying to minimize the cons, but also acknowledging the cons and trying to find ways that you can still support them in environments that may be a little different or to have different challenges that come up. So that's what this episode is all about. If you don't know me, my name is Nadia, and I moved with my family, my husband and my son, to Bali 3 years ago. And we also welcomed our daughter here while we were living here 2 years ago. So it's been a whirlwind. It's been an adventure. We've just experienced all different types of things that some maybe other families haven't had to experience because we actually had our daughter here. So I'll walk through that a little bit as well in this video. And so if you're interested in making a move internationally with kids, these are just some things to keep in mind. And I really do believe that, like I said, there are pros and cons to everything. And it's really just about being honest about some of the challenges and looking for solutions and really having a growth mindset so that you don't stay or complain about what's going on. Actually try to figure out how you can rise above it, how you can just meet those challenges and find awesome solutions that work for your family. So that's where we are, and I'm going to dive into some of the questions in this video. So the first thing that I'm going to talk about, and I'm looking over here at my laptop, is what is harder with kids than I expected. And so our son was still quite young when we moved over here. It was a month before his 4th birthday when we moved over here. And so what I realized is really kids are so adaptable. Kids, thankfully, are more, I was going to say more flexible than we give them credit for sometimes. My son so quickly made friends. He made so many friends in a very short amount of time. Whereas with me as an adult, it took me, I had thoughts in my head. I was more nervous. But he's made so many different friends from all over the world. He goes to an international school here in Canggu in Bali, and he has friends from all over the world, which is really cool to see. There's been some challenges on the back end because as he gets older, he's becoming more and more aware that he's one of the few brown kids at his school. And so that has come with a little bit more anxiety, I have found. And we're trying to find ways to navigate that. And for us, some of the things that we've done and some of the tools in our arsenal are making sure that we have, my son loves reading. And so making sure that we have books that show people that also look like us, people that are Black and brown, and making sure that he has an appreciation and a sense of respect and admiration for his skin, his curly hair, the ways that he's different. That's something that's been so important to us since moving over here. Whereas if we had stayed in Bermuda, that wouldn't even be something that we really had to be conscious about so much, because Bermuda is a majority Black country, and it's definitely a very multicultural island as well. We have a lot of people from obviously different parts of European descent, but they're also still Bermudian. We have a lot of Portuguese Bermudians. We have Also, some people from the Philippines or India that have come over and their families are here and they're working in Bermuda. And so it's something that we wouldn't have to really be as conscious about, but we've had to be very aware, and we've had to try our best as a family to speak positively about our curly hair and our brown skin. Sometimes I try to share some of the benefits of having brown skin because we don't have to be quite as religious as some of the fair-skinned people about putting on sunscreen, which my son loves. We still put it on every once in a while, but it's not something, thankfully, we have a built-in layer of skin protection. And so it's just something that we try to talk about in a positive way. We try to even surround him with other people that look like us, even if there aren't that many kids in our area that look like him. We have our own friends, me and my husband, and we try to have them over, and they're his aunties and uncles. And so that gives him maybe just a little glimpse at other people that look like us. And then obviously when we get to go back home to Bermuda, he has all of his cousins and his friends, and that's obviously really fun to see. I feel like he just takes a sigh when he goes back because it's like he doesn't have to think anymore. I think sometimes when you're in environments where you're the other, you unconsciously maybe, or you just learn that you have to maybe censor certain parts of yourself. And so that's definitely something that we are aware of, and we try to help him to navigate for sure. And so one of the downsides is we have noticed that as our son also gets older, he's 7.5 now, and there has been some kids at his school that tease him because he's different. And so the reality is that's just what kids do, unfortunately, all over the world. They pick out what makes you different and maybe what you might be sensitive about, and they use that as like fuel to tease you. And so sometimes we've had to have these really hard conversations with other parents in our son's class, with teachers, and just making them aware that this is something that is going on. And yeah, we've had some teasing that I would say isn't racism, but is racial teasing. And so that's been our biggest challenge that we've tried to navigate in recent, I would say, year and a half with our son's school. And so most of the kids at his international school are from parts of Europe. They're from England or Australia or all over Europe. And so he definitely stands out. But the good thing is when he's with his friends, it doesn't make a difference. But when he's in new environments, that's when his anxiety spikes a little bit. And so another thing that I wanted to share about that I did not expect to be quite so difficult was actually when we had our daughter. And so we had our daughter Zoe in February of 2024, so 2 years ago. And the giving birth part was actually pretty easy. I might make another video about that because we didn't have insurance at the time, or maybe we did, but it didn't cover my maternity because we weren't expecting to get pregnant. It was planned, but we hadn't planned in terms of insurance, the whole process. Long story short, it was very affordable, and I'll go into that hopefully in another video, what some of the costs were. But it was, thankfully, that was not something that was a negative impact. But the challenge came actually after, because there was so much paperwork to fill out. We had to try to get her a visa, and we had to try to get her a passport, and we were trying to do these things at the same time. And there was lots of different loopholes that we had to figure out. For instance, we had to register her birth with the village chief, with the banjar, and that was like a whole thing in itself. And so that was something that we were not prepared for. We didn't realize how hard it would be, because when we had our son, it was just like we take him home from the hospital and that's it. Whereas even with her passport, we had to apply for a British passport because as Bermudians, we are British overseas territory and we have British passports. And we had actually applied for the very first time. We did it wrong. And so we had her birthplace listed as one part the hospital, the city that the hospital is in, but it's supposed to be the overall like region. And so we had to redo that when she was 1 year old because we couldn't get her visa renewed. So there's been lots of paperwork, lots of new challenges that we've had to overcome as a family for sure. And it's just been a really busy last 2 years. It's been so many different things to navigate, so many lessons. And I think if you slow down and you're honest with yourself about some of the hard things that you go through when you have kids and you're traveling, it's not just you, you're navigating different challenges because of your kids. But if you slow down and actually like are present with whatever the challenge is, you start to see that there are lessons in everything. There are lessons in what we're going through and what we're trying to teach and instill in our son, right? It's teaching us that we have to be really intentional with how we speak about ourselves, about our own ethnicity, our own care, our own things that make us different. It's teaching us about how to instill confidence in him with, like I said, books that are self-affirming, or even just movies that we put on, or things that help to instill in him a positive view of himself as a person that maybe looks different from other people here. And I think the good thing, the good balance in Bali is that even though in our international school, he's one of the few brown kids, in Bali as a whole, most of the people are brown. So that in itself, we're not minorities in that sense, in a color sense, but we are definitely minorities in terms of an ethnicity sense with our curly hair, and my son's got a little fro. And so, yeah, it's something that if we're present with it, the challenges at sometimes can feel overwhelming, but they can also humble you and really teach you. I think with me, they've been teaching me to be more present, to be my husband has really just helped us to navigate so many of the challenges that we've been going up against. Whereas before, I know I would just be like, okay, let's run, let's leave. These are too hard. My husband has been like an anchor, and he always has been, which is really cool to just be like, no, but we can overcome this one step at a time, one day at a time. We'll overcome these things. And yeah, those have been really interesting. And I think another blessing in disguise is that they've really forced me to rely more heavily on my faith. I remember when I first got out here, I was just so burnt out, and we had gone through a lot of maybe religious trauma. We had a situation where our church family had just completely divided, and our church was separated due to a ethical matter that went on with one of our pastors. And it was just so hard. We were trying to find churches that would be the same as the one that we had, because we had a really amazing teacher of the word. Our pastor was a really gifted preacher, and there was like beautiful worship, and we had all of our close friends and family that attended the same church, so it felt like home. And so anyways, we had a bit of a spiritual displacement. Long story short, all of the challenges that we've had to navigate as a family with kids in Indonesia and Bali has forced me to get close to God again in a way that I hadn't really been, and in a way that I had let life disappointments and life challenges really build up and overwhelm me to the point where I was distancing myself from God. And so these challenges over the last few years that we've navigated as a family have allowed me to depend on God again, allowed me to go to him in prayer, allowed me to figure out how to trust him again. And so I think the faith aspect is always the hidden silver lining in a lot of the things that we experience. Going back to the things no one tells you about moving to Bali with kids, I want to answer this question: what's easier than at home? And so I think that having family, like household help, has made things a lot easier. I went into this in another video recently. We have a cleaner that comes 3 times a week to clean up, whereas before we were on our own. It was very overwhelming because you commute to work, you commute home, you get home, it's 6:30, you have time for dinner, but there's no time for all of the other things. And to sometimes have someone that's in your corner, that's supporting you, keeping the house organized, keeping the house clean, it just takes off such a heavy burden that I didn't realize was on my shoulders before. And I always felt a sense of guilt because our home was never in order. And I think that it's been, trust me when I say my house is still messy a lot of the time, but it's still been such a blessing and a gift to have that help. We also have help from a nanny. And whereas before we would have family help, now we have a nanny who has been helping us on a day-to-day basis with our kids. She's usually off every other weekend and at least one day of the weekend. But the reality is that the blessing of having a nanny versus having family help is that when you give them instructions or tell them a certain way that you want things to be done, they actually listen. Whereas I found before with family, and I know that they're well-meaning and everything, but sometimes they don't listen to you. Sometimes they literally disregard what you say. And that's really tough because you, at least in our family, my mother-in-law is super well-meaning, always helpful, always will do anything for the kids, but just didn't listen. And it was infuriating sometimes because you want to be respected as a parent. You want to be respected as a mom when you're trying to figure out your own traditions and your own way of doing things with your kids, right? And so that's been a blessing, is having those two channels of support with our nanny and with our cleaner. It's really helped to make our lives and having kids even remotely manageable. I think it would be too overwhelming. We would have had to for sure go back home if we didn't have that layer of support with especially young kids. We have a 2-year-old and we have a 7-year-old. One other thing that I wanted to mention is that the cost of moving with kids, for sure, you have to be really mindful that it's going to be so much more expensive if you have kids and a family than it would be to move to a different part of the world with just yourself, or even as a couple if you're both a dual income household. You just have so many more expenses. I would say, like, me and my husband joke about this all the time, but if we were moving over here by ourselves, our lives would be so completely different. We would just be doing things for ourselves, a lot more self-care, I'm sure, a lot more time as a couple, like date nights, a lot more just fun. Like, we have friends who have older kids and they're like 12, 13, 16, and their lives are so different than us who are in the mix of raising young kids that require more undivided attention. You can't leave them unattended for a moment unless you have care. So that's been something that we've noticed. And in terms of the cost, you definitely have to think about things like education, like I said, childcare for our youngest little one, activities. We try to keep them as busy as possible. And all of those things add up in terms of how much our cost of living is over here. And so, like, weekend activities, if we leave the house, we're for sure spending at least $1 million to $1.5 million rupiah per day that we leave the house. So we have to always keep that in mind. And so that's equivalent to around 70 to 100 US dollars. And so one thing I found is when we're back home, you just do really simple things like on the weekends, like maybe you go to the aquarium, which is cheap, or you do like the same things. Whereas out here we have, because it's a much bigger island, there's more things to do. We have not only the kids' activities, but we try to, on occasion, explore as a family. So that's always fun, especially when we have family that are visiting. We definitely do a lot more exploring then as well. So let's see if there's any other points I wanted to talk about. One of the blessings I would say I touched on really briefly is that when you do relocate with a family and you have kids, you get to be intentional with the new traditions, that new routines that you're actually setting up for your kids. And that's something that I don't think we would have had the luxury of having had we stayed back home in Bermuda, just because I feel like when you are home and your family is in that home, a lot of what you do, and maybe you do it not even realizing, but you do it out of habit, you do it out of routine, you do it because you've always done things this way, you do it because your family has always done things that way. Whereas when we moved out here, it gave us a fresh start, a blank slate, so to speak, to start to create routines that we actually wanted to have for our family. And so that's been mixed up a little bit with the baby, because now we have a little one and my husband's working nights, and so we're trying to navigate that whole challenge with our schedules. But I hope that as she gets bigger, we can get out of the house a little earlier and start to do different things with our weekends and just keep them more busy. That's my son in the background. Okay, so I think it's time to wrap up this video, but I just wanted to end with some of the things that I think are real amazing blessings of having kids in a different part of the world. You'll notice that they are picking up different aspects of the culture here. And so one of the cool things is that both of my kids are learning Bahasa Indonesia. They're definitely going to be way more fluent than me and my husband just because we are older and our brains are slower. But our son learns it in school and he has a really wide vocabulary, which is really awesome to see. And then our daughter is picking it up every single day from when she plays with her friends to when she hangs out with her nanny. And so they're just getting such a different experience. The places that they travel to, the animals that they get to see, all of these things are like just a little adventure that they wouldn't have had exposure to had they only grown up in Bermuda. And so it's fun to get to expose them to different things, right? And so that's been, I think, one of the blessings of being in a different part of the world. They see different animals, they get to see monkeys, they get to see little like monitor lizards that come up from the rivers sometimes, and we've seen snakes. We're living in an adventure, and you can be overwhelmed by the adventure sometimes or stressed out by the adventure, but I think if you actually take the time to be present and intentional, the adventure is so rich with its own lessons and beauties that we can all just gain so much from. So I'm really excited about the future, and the reality is that as long as we continue to be intentional with our kids and remember to teach them the things that we know that they need to learn in terms of confidence, in terms of instilling their self-worth and teaching them about their heritage and identity, but also teaching them about the new country that they're in. I think if you can strike that right balance and you get to create an environment for your kids that is just so unique and so special. So I'm going to stop this video here, but thank you so much for listening, and I will see you in the next episode. Bye for now.